Okay. Guys, because the meeting has disconnected, I think it is the time to repeat playing the recording. It is your chance now just to listen to the recording the second time, just to be able to answer these 8 questions about family history, about David Taylor abuse. So let's repeat playing the recording, and please, guys, listen carefully.
Script 7.10.
7.10.
David Taylor Buse.
I come from Newcastle in England, but now I live in Perth, Australia. I've been here nearly 10 years. My wife, Jodie, is Australian, and our children, Russell and Alice, were born here. Alice is named after my grandmother, her great-grandmother, Alice Buse. She's 89 now and still lives in Newcastle. Lately, I've become really interested in my family history back in the UK. I've started speaking to my grandmother about it. I've found out that she was the youngest of 9 children and the only one to have been born in England. Her 8 brothers and sisters were all born in Scotland. They came from the very north of Scotland, from some islands called the Orkneys. They worked there as farmers over 100 years ago. My grandmother told me that hundreds of years before that, our family's ancestors were actually Norwegian. They came over to Scotland in the 9th century. She says that's why we all have blonde hair in our family. Anyway, it became more and more difficult for my great-grandparents to make a living farming, so they travelled south. They finally arrived in the north of England, in Newcastle, with their 8 children. Alice was born soon after they arrived.
So this is the recording. We noticed that David talked about this place, then for the family to move to Perth. Absolutely in this place. So this is David Buse, this is Russell, and this is Alice. Okay, so I think it's the time just to answer these questions. And absolutely, this is the grandmother. Now, question number 1 is saying, how long has David lived in Perth?
Nearly 10 years.
How many years?
10 years.
10 years. Okay.
Nearly 10 years.
Nearly
Yes.
10 years. Amazing. Absolutely. We have to listen to the recording again just to check your answers if they are correct or maybe no. 2. Who are the 2 Alices in his life?
The first Alice is his grandmother and the
Grandmother. And the second is what?
her daughter.
Okay, his daughter. We have to listen to check this out again. 3. Where does his grandmother live?
England.
In England. Let me write England because we have to listen again. So England. Okay, now 4 is saying, where were her brothers and sisters born?
North Scotland.
North Scotland. I loved it. North Scotland. I'm not going to write all the words because Scotland, maybe I don't have a space. So this is 4, and absolutely we have to listen again. 5, what did her parents do for a living?
They were famous.
They were famous. Okay, let me write famous because we have to listen again. Okay, now 6 is saying, what happened in the 9th century? No one knows.
They traveled to some country.
Okay, where did they travel? Okay.
To London? No, no, that's London.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Okay, this question is still unanswered. 7. Why do so many people in the family have blonde hair?
I think
Mhm.
because they was born
They were.
in the
Mhm.
in Europe, in the Scotland, I think.
So because they were born in Scotland, in Scotland. Okay, so we have to listen again just to be able to check your answers if they are correct or maybe you have some mistakes. Now, finally, 8. Why did the family leave the Orkney Islands?
Because
No,
to Alice arrived, I think,
because Alice arrived.
and they was so hard to live.
Okay, so let me write the answer
Yes, and
because, uh-huh.
they was so hard to live
Why? Why it was really hard to live? What did you say? Because Alice arrived? Am I right? Because Alice arrived.
What's the meaning of Alice?
Okay, Alice is the name, but I don't know if it is the name of the daughter or the grandmother. Alice is a
Okay.
name, guys. A name of the
Okay.
girl. Absolutely, a name of a girl. Okay, I think now we have to listen again to the recording to check the answers. The answer of question number 6 is still unknown. So let's listen step by step just to listen, just to find out the answers one by one.
Tape script 7.10. David Taylor Buse.
I come from Newcastle in England, but now I live in Perth, Australia. I've been here nearly 10 years.
Thank you. I've been here nearly 10 years. So the answer for question number 1 is correct. Now to who are the two Alices in his family?
My wife, Jodie, is Australian, and our children, Russell and Alice, were born here. Alice is named after my grandmother.
Alice is named after my grandmother, who is.
Her great-grandmother, Alice Buse.
So that says it. Her grandmother, his great-grandmother, and we don't have to forget his daughter. Thank you so much. So question number 2 is correct. Now, 3. Where does his grandmother live?
She's 89 now and still lives in Newcastle. Lately, I've become really interested in my family history back in the UK. I've started speaking to my grandmother about it. I've found out that she was the youngest of 9 children and the only one to have been born in England.
And where does she live?
Her 8 brothers and sisters were all
In England.
In England? Okay, I think we have to go a little bit to the recording just to check this out.
were born here. Alice is named after my grandmother, her great-grandmother, Alice Buse. She's 89 now and still lives in Newcastle.
What? Still lives in?
Newcastle?
This is it. Okay. So, is it England? Okay, guys. So, not England, but in Newcastle. Okay, let's keep listening. Now we have the question, which is about where were her brothers and sisters born?
Lately, I've become really interested in my family history back in the UK. I've started speaking to my grandmother about it. I've found out that she was the youngest of 9 children and the only one to have been born in England. Her 8 brothers and sisters.
Guys, there is a big difference between to be born somewhere and to live somewhere. Okay,
were all born in Scotland. They came from the very north of Scotland.
So, where were her brothers and sister born? I think I have to go back a
North
little bit.
Scotland.
Yes, okay.
Out that she was the youngest of 9 children and the
9.
only one to have been born in England. Her 8 brothers and sisters were all born in Scotland. They came from the very north of Scotland.
Thank you. So in Scotland. 5. What did her parents do for a living?
From some islands called the Orkneys.
This is it. Orkneys.
They worked there as farmers over 100 years ago.
They work there as what? Let me go back a little bit.
Her 8 brothers and sisters were all born in Scotland.
This is it.
They came from the very north of Scotland, from some islands called the Orkneys. They worked there as farmers over...
What? They work there as what?
Farmers.
Farmers. Thank you. This is what they did for a living. So, farmers. Farm, which is a noun. Now the job, we have are. The job is what? Farmer. This is what we have discussed earlier in the previous pages. Farmers. Okay, now the question number 6 is saying what happened in the 9th century?
100 years ago. My grandmother told me that hundreds of years before that, our family's ancestors were actually Norwegian. They came over to Scotland in the 9th century.
What?
They came to Scotland in
Bravo,
the
they came.
9th
Exactly.
century.
Yes, they were Norwegian and they came to Scotland. So this is what happened in the 9th century. Now 7, why do so many people in the family have blonde hair?
She says that's why we all have blonde hair in our family.
So why?
Because they born in Scotland, they come to Scotland.
Because they came to Scotland. Okay? So because of that, they had blonde hair. Okay, so now question number 8. Why did the family leave the Orkney Islands?
Anyway, it became more and more difficult for my great-grandparents to make a living farming, so they travelled south.
So why? I think I have to go back a little bit in the recording and repeat.
She says that's why we all have blonde hair in our family. Anyway, it became more and more difficult for my great-grandparents to make a living farming, so they travelled south.
So why did they leave the Orkney Islands? No one knows? So notice, guys.
difficult.
Difficult to what?
إنه حياته صعبة. Difficult
because
life.
why? He said that it was difficult to what?
Your grand.
Difficult to, let me repeat one last time. Difficult to something, let's repeat.
Norwegian. They came over to Scotland in the 9th century. She says that's why we all have blonde hair in our family. Anyway, it became more and more difficult for my great-grandparents to make a living farming, so they travelled south.
So, to make
a living farming?
Bravo. It was really difficult to make a living farming. It was really difficult to farm. This is why they left the Orkney Islands. Okay? So this is it. Exactly. This is about listening, but it is not.
Please, can you solve number 1?
Number
about
1?
the life of your
How?
grandparents? Yeah. to
How,
practice.
wait, how long has David lived in Perth?
No, not this one.
Uh-huh. Which
Number one, what do you know about the lives of your grandparents?
But I have already asked you about your parents
Yes, I know this, but I
and
need
grandparents.
your ideas.
These are your grandparents, Jamila. I mean, when the question is saying, Jamila, what do you know about the lives of your grandparents? The way that they were living.
Yes, I know this, but
Ah,
I know to solve it.
mm.
انه انت تعطينا الحل ونحن نحفظنا حتى نعمل practice.
But we have already done the practice, Jamila. You told me about your grandparents, didn't you?
teacher
Yes,
منى
Mr.
جميلة منى
Holy God, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Guys, I have already asked you about your grandparents and about
Yes, Mr. I know this, but I want to give us an example about your grandparents.
about mine.
Yes.
To be honest, I have lived with my grandparents for almost 6 years. Okay. And I think that my grandfather was a lieutenant in the military. So he was in the army. And to be honest, he was trying to apply the rules in house. I'm talking about the army rules because, for example, to wake up early, to sleep early, to have a breakfast early, to turn the lights off if you want to go out of the room that you were in. So, and let me tell you that, before going to the army, joining the army just to be the lieutenant, he was a farmer. He was really waking up in the early morning just to go to the ground to farm the lands. Not only my grandfather, but my grandmother was helping him. It was really hard because they had to work for almost 12 hours a day from the early morning till the sunrise, till the when the sun goes down, I mean. So I think their lives were really hard because they had to work too much just to live. Okay? And they hardly bought the house that they are living in now. I can say that their lives were really hard. It's not, to be honest, it's not as easy as our life, because in the time they didn't have internet, they didn't have cars just to travel or to go to work. So they had to walk. They had to walk for a long period of time, and absolutely, let me say, they had to walk for too much miles just to, or too many miles, sorry, to reach the work. This is the story about my grandparents, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Okay.
it's the story about all
But to be honest, let me tell you something. Guys, we noticed that your grandfather and grandmother lived really a long life. Yeah, I know that
Yes.
my grandfather is dead now, but he lived 94 years. This is really not that easy just to live this like this today in these days. Because, guys, we noticed that our grandparents were eating healthy food.
100%.
Exactly. So even, guys, my grandmother is still alive. She's 104. This is something amazing. And yeah, these days we can notice that maximum any person lives for 60 or maybe 65, and he begins to have diabetes, heart diseases like heart attack or something like that. This is because of the spoiled food that we are eating these days. I know that they were working hard, but to be honest, This is our normal life. This is our nature. We have to wake up early just to go to work and to come to our houses when the sun goes down. But I can say that most of us right now stay late at night. We don't sleep early. We don't wake up early. We don't eat our breakfast, for example. We don't drink milk. We don't eat enough meat, for example. So this is why we have these diseases. Guys, before 200s, let me say 200s ago, there was not like diabetes. Diabetes is a modern disease. Because why? Because of our food these days. Our food, guys, is full of sugar, full of carbohydrates, something not that natural. Okay, I'm sorry, I talked too much, but I wanted you to know. Okay?
Thank you.
It's not the end because we still have another recording to listen, but because time's up, absolutely, we have to leave now, and I'm going to delay or postpone the exercise number 3, which is about listening to the next class. So if you have any questions, guys, you can ask me.
No, I haven't. Thank you, teacher, so much.
So I have to thank you guys.
Thank you, teacher.
Wish a good
Thank you.
night. Thank you. Bye-bye.